Hello everybody. Welcome to Disability Innovation Live. I can see lots of you are just joining the session now. So just want to say a big thank you for you all coming and joining us today. So on our Disability Innovation Live session today, we're going to be talking about product narratives, the challenges of supply and demand side barriers for priority AT. So just to give you a little information about the session, we have closed captions and BSL available for today. Closed captions you may need to just turn on your control systems, which may be at the bottom or the top of your screen normally. And if you wish to use BSL, the easiest way to view that is to turn on gallery view. So next to the green bar at the top of your screen, you should be able to click to view options. And then on the down menu, you'll be able to select view side by side. And that function is only available on desktop, unfortunately. So if you're looking to use BSL, you'll need to be joining from a desktop today. We very much would like your questions as we go through the session today. We have the Q&A box available, so please do type in any questions you have as we go through the session. And we've got some time towards the end of the session where we'll come to those questions and answer them in a bit more detail, and we'll also try and respond as we go through as well. So please do share them as you think of them. After today's session, we will be providing a recording and a transcript as well, so that will be available for all attendees or people that aren't able to join us today. So just a little bit of information about Disability Innovation Live. This is the Global Disability Innovations Hub monthly webinar series. And we very much use it to kind of share our own knowledge and expertise and that of our partners and our friends and our colleagues across the disability innovation sector. So really that's to kind of capture some of the stories behind the innovations and the people behind the products. And it's a bit of an informal space for ideas and reflections and just to get in a bit more detail around some of these really fascinating, very broad areas that we're all working across. So we really value your feedback. We're just at the start of our webinar series. This is our third, I believe now, maybe fourth, and we'll continue to do them on a monthly basis moving forward as well. So just a little bit about the Global Disability Innovation Hub. We are a research and practice centre driving disability innovation for a fairer world. We are born out of the legacy of the 2012 London Paralympic Games, and we are both a community interest company and also an academic research centre that's based at UCL. We have programmes in 25 different countries and we're aiming to reach over 50 million people by 2022. So it's just some brief kind of instructions into who we've got talking today. So there's just a visual here of the panellists. So we have Catherine, Frederick, Alison, Dennis and Ben, who will be talking to you today around different specific areas of the product narratives and the reports focused around prosthetics and eyeglasses. I'll leave them to introduce themselves individually as they come onto their individual sections. So we'll maybe start off going to Professor Catherine Holloway, who's the Academic Director at the GDI Hub, just to introduce us in a little bit more detail about what the product narratives are and how they came about.
Hey Louise, thank you very much, and thank you everybody for taking your time to join us today. I know everybody is busy with battling COVID and busy day lives. So the product narratives came out of the AT 2030 project, and I want to take a step back maybe and think about when I first heard the term product narrative. I remember I was sitting with Frey, who you'll hear from later, and he was saying the words product narrative. And I thought, I understand those words. Narrative, I understand. Some kind of a story. About products, I understand. I get that. And I think the same was true when I said the words assistive technology to Frey. He understood technology assists, but he didn't really know the assistive technology world. He had worked in other fields of healthcare technology, and I had worked in assistive technology, but had never really ventured into the world of what is called market shaping and the thinking that goes into a document that is called a product narrative. So I'm delighted today to have Frey and all the rest of the team here to talk about what product narratives are and how they're going to help inform the ATscale partnership, as well as partners like UNICEF. So you can go to the next slide, please. So as I said earlier, it's part of the AT 2030 program, and that's part of what works. And so when I first heard about product narratives and market shaping, as an academic, as a professor, I thought to myself, well, could that work for assistive technology? And I want it to work for assistive technology, but my job is always to keep asking, does it work with everything? Do we have the evidence? Where is the data? And so I was convinced by Frey, and we were all convinced that this would be a good part of the programme. And so we worked together to shape that programme, and I'm sure we would not have got the funding if it hadn't been for the wonderful partnership that we brought together, including UNICEF and of course CHAI. So 80-20-30 is £20 million worth of funding. It's a huge amount of funding, and people often ask why they haven't got some of it. And the answer is that a lot of the money is going into quite structural work. And some of that structural work is in creating these documents called product narratives. And so we hope to reach 9 million people directly and 6 million more people indirectly, so driving a lifetime of potential, and we're operational in 15 countries across Africa and Asia. So as I've said, the product narratives are developed by the Clinton Health Access Initiative under the UK aid-funded 80-20-30 programme. That's led by us at GDI Hub, and we do a lot of this work on the product narratives in support of the ATscale strategy. And GDI Hub were a founding member of the ATscale team, and we continue to want and see its growing success. So the state of what we do in the product narratives, I think hopefully you'll see this if you have read them. They're great reads. So if you're an assistive technology expert in prosthetics, then maybe some of the prosthetics bit is really obvious to you. But if you've never known anything about prosthetics or eyeglasses, then they're brilliant documents to really understand the state of the global market for each product. They give global recommendations on how to address barriers. They're focused on low and middle income countries, so where there's greatest need. And it's the first time that we've all partnered together. So we've drawn together technical assistance, and GDI Hub had some of it. We've also brought in partners from like London School of Hygiene, Tropical Medicine. Actually, I was looking through the attendee list, and lots of you have helped make these documents, so thank you. And it's the first time it's been done on assistive technology. So yeah, they are the current environment. So the current environment changes. We're doing the one for digital communication aids and things at the moment, and of course that space changes even more rapidly. We hope that you also see there's an importance of these documents, the value to drive change, and that they look at trends across the AT products. And more than anything else, I think they demonstrate the value of global partnerships and collaborations. So I just wanted to bring it back. These documents are documents, and in them they're very technical. And this is David, and I met David 4 years ago in Rio, where I was lucky enough to be at the Paralympics, and we went for Favela. We met Rio. We met David, and David had lost his leg by jumping off a train, because he used to jump onto trains for fun and jump off of trains, because that was apparently what he did for fun. And he was a great guy, but he sort of half knew what a prosthetic was, but he had no idea of how to get one. And so what the hope is for product narratives, whilst they're technical documents, is that they help people like David get the legs they need to be even better footballers than he already is, because he's actually incredibly good. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Frey, I believe, and hope that you enjoy the rest of this conversation. Please do make it a conversation. Drop questions in. We're very open to answering them. I can help with some of the technical ones, prosthetics, and not at all on eyeglasses and hearing aids.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Kathy. Really interesting just to hear that introduction, and also just to get that kind of individual story, looking a little bit more, I guess, about the bigger picture here, that kind of helping individual people and getting the assistive technology to those that need it most and currently don't have access. So I'll now hand across to Frey just to give us a bit more information, who's based at the Clinton Health Access Initiative.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Louise. And perhaps by means of introduction, for those of you that don't know Clinton Health Access Initiative, or CHAI, in the first place, we're a global health organization, and our commitment is towards saving lives and reducing the burden of disease in low and middle income countries. And we operate, or we do that by operating in 35 countries worldwide at the service of governments, helping to strengthen the capabilities of the government as well as the private sector to create systems that can sustain without or continued assistance. So that is primarily what we do. Now, it obviously triggers the question, why did we help develop those narratives in the first place? Why did we take that on? And as Kathy explained earlier, CHAI's partnered with a variety of donors, including the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, to increase access and lowered the prices for several commodities, including HIV medications and contraceptives. And based on that work, we were asked to help assess if and how that type of work could also be replicated in assistive technology. And in terms of the scope, because assistive technology covers such a broad number of products, in consultation with different founding partners of ATscale, from which we'll hear later on, 5 assistive products were prioritized for a deeper dive under the AT2030 program, including these are wheelchairs, hearing aids, prostheses, eyeglasses, and digital devices. And in case you were wondering, the name Narrative was actually inspired by Untitled, a global health initiative, who regularly publish and update reports on the state in disease areas that they support. So that's just where that name Narrative comes from. What are the objectives? Well, each report is aimed at providing global stakeholders with a perspective on 4 things. First, what is the current state of the sector and relevant market context for a product area in low and middle income countries? Second, what are the key challenges and barriers that inhibit access? Third, what are some high-level objectives to overcome those barriers and help drive availability and affordability? And last, what are early opportunities to accelerate access to specific products? In terms of the primary audience, the reports are obviously intended to all stakeholders, including interested funders, as well as implementing partners, private sector, but also country governments, anyone that is seeking to be informed about the sector and seeking to align programs and activities. In terms of how these narratives were developed, so the reports are actually a synthesis of an analysis that took us between 4 and 6 months. And there were different components of that analysis. There was a big proportion was desktop research. There were calls with experts and key opinion leaders, with NGOs, with disabled persons organizations and user groups, with buyers and with suppliers, amongst others. And I want to recognize that many of you have been involved and supported and contributed in this process in one of the product areas. In addition, there's also been on-the-ground data gathering that we've done in several countries in different regions of the world. I want to acknowledge also the fact that the process involved the technical expertise that was provided to us from the GDI Hub. And several experts, including I think everyone representing on this panel today, was involved in the review of the reports before publication. I want to note just a few things when people read those reports. Obviously, experiences and opinions differ, and these reports are not meant to be consensus papers, but rather try to document different perspectives and make different observations. Second, the reports are not capturing every detail or necessarily capture every stakeholder's perspective. Perhaps there might be opportunities to add that later on, but they're primarily meant to provide a directional output on what needs to be done and set a common direction. Last, the primary purpose is to direct future work and be actionable. Now, in terms of some of the general observations, there's a couple of cross-cutting themes or themes that are common across those narratives. Obviously, the first one is the limitation or limited involvement from governments, suggesting a need to support governments to develop comprehensive policies and plans in order to deliver the services and the products in a way that is sustainable. I think the second piece is linked to the question that we put ourselves forward in terms of, can market shaping also be taken into this area? And we have looked at the interventions, and they suggest that there is possibility to also improve affordability and availability through market shaping in low and middle income countries. And last, as resources and limited resources and efforts are limited, the stakeholders, including donors, should come together under a unified approach to support the efforts. So this is meant to be a first step in a consultative process to build broader support across different partners, suppliers, and donors, governments and user groups, of which some will speak after me. So I hope that was a help to give some context to these documents. I hand back over to you, Louise.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Freya. I think that's really interesting, very much just in terms of looking at that bigger picture. And I think what you really kind of clearly highlighted there is that importance for sustainability, but also that need for a unified approach. And I think that's really where these documents and the product narratives take the sector into a new space and into something that is very collaborative and brings together a lot of the global work that has maybe been happening in silo, to enable us all to work together a little bit better and to kind of, as one, have more power and influence, particularly on things, as you mentioned, around kind of policy and planning at a higher kind of governmental level as well. So it's really, really fascinating to hear that. So I'm now going to hand across to Alison from ATscale, who's going to give us just a little bit more kind of, I guess, detail around what happens next and what's the kind of longer term vision for some of these kind of reports and the outputs from them.
Great, thank you so much for the introduction, Louise, and to GDI Hub for the opportunity to participate on behalf of ATscale today. ATscale, the Global Partnership for Assistive Technology, is a cross-sector partnership bringing together bilateral donors, UN organizations, disabled persons organizations, non-governmental organizations, governments of low and middle income countries, to address the gap in access to affordable, appropriate, and quality assistive products and services, particularly for low and middle income countries, as we've heard about already. And as you heard, we have a number of our founding partners on this panel. So GDI Hub, CHAI, and UNICEF are three of our 11 founding partners. And we've set an ambitious goal of catalyzing action to ensure that 500 million more people globally are reached with life-changing assistive technology by 2030. And we have two primary strategic objectives guiding our work. So first, we want to develop the enabling ecosystem for increased access to assistive technology. And when I say the enabling ecosystem, this involves increasing political will and focus on this work, mobilizing additional resources, addressing the policy landscape, and then strengthening the necessary cross-cutting systems for assistive technology, particularly at a country level. And then secondly, we're going to take a market building and market shaping approach, focus both on the demand and the supply level, with an initial focus on the 5-party products and related services that Frey highlighted in his talk. And in line with the second objective, the product narratives of these market and sector analyses that we started to hear about are really critical because they identify the initial key barriers that we need to overcome to ensure that we're investing in the most necessary interventions to strengthen the market and the systems to accelerate access to these products and services. So each product narrative includes strategic objectives and some initial interventions that can be implemented. And then these are elaborated into what we're calling action and investment plans, illuminating more of the specific interventions and investments that are needed. And ATscale will fund a number of these interventions directly, and our objective is for the plans to guide implementation and investment by others also as we move forward together to improve access to assistive technology. Next slide, please. And building on what Frey highlighted a bit in his section as well, there are common themes emerging from the product narratives, and many of these, as I said, will be areas for investment early on, such as the need for improved data and research standards, global guidance on how countries can select the right appropriate products, and also guidance on what service delivery might look like for these products, development of more affordable and appropriate assistive products specific for the different contexts that we're talking about, but also innovative screening tools and service delivery models that can reduce the cost of provision. So we'll be thinking about reducing the cost of products, but also reducing how the cost of how these products are provided. And further, I think there's a very strong need for integration of these products and services into government systems, as well as increased government ownership and resourcing as well of these programs. Just to say, we've focused on 5 priority products initially, and these were selected because of the global need as well as the potential for applying market shaping approaches. So we of course recognize that there are many assistive products critical for improving individuals' lives globally. So we're confident that investing in the interventions that are emerging from these product narratives will not only improve the markets and systems for these products, but will also enable improvement of the broader integrated systems for AT, thus having an impact across the broader range of important assistive technology. I think as you read, hopefully, these product narratives, you'll also hear the importance that is placed on the fact that implementation of market shaping and programmatic efforts is not meant to be taken on by one actor, but it's going to require partnership and coordination across all of us. And so we see a real opportunity to use these product narratives and the resulting action plans to move forward towards a unified strategy for all of us working within the sector. So we look forward as ATscale in working with many of you on this call in multiple ways. So I think many of you will implement many of these interventions. We'll also look forward to continuing to hear lessons learned from your work and your lived experiences. And I know that all of us on this panel will want to engage you to support us in continuing to refine the plans for action and investment as they become sector-wide strategies towards increasing access to this affordable and appropriate quality assistive technology. So thanks so much for joining this really important conversation.
Thank you, Alison. I think what comes across to me really strongly there is about the fact that we're almost at the start of the journey, and these kind of product narratives are a really interesting point to be taken forward, as you say, as a group, as a whole, as the kind of assistive technology world, working together to then kind of drive forward this implementation and start developing some of those kind of hugely broad and complex areas that you mentioned around service delivery, around kind of appropriate availability of assistive technologies, around reducing costs. It's certainly a huge area, but I think it's a really exciting time, and it really gives, I guess, a foundation for us all to kind of build upon. And it will be very interesting to see where we get to in the next couple of years as these documents and as the strategy that comes from them moves forward and becomes kind of implemented on a wider country, but also kind of international scale as well. So certainly one to watch. So I'm now going to hand across to Dennis, who's just going to give us a little bit more detail, specifically on the Eyeglasses product narrative report. So Dennis, I'll hand across to you to introduce yourself.
Thank you. Hi everyone, and thank you GDI for inviting me to join this panel. I'm going to take you on a whirlwind tour of the Eyeglasses narrative, just to show the highlights. But before I go through way too many slides, I just want to take a minute to address how UNICEF intends to use these product narratives. For us, the 5 product narratives is an excellent way of gaining a first-hand market overview of these different product categories that shows us how we as a headquarters division can better support our 160 country offices around the world, both programmatically and technically, when it comes to these product groups. It's also a way for us to decide whether UNICEF should play a stronger procurement role on these 5 product areas. Today, UNICEF procures for around $3.5 to $4 billion a year. Not a lot on AT, but these narratives is sort of our first step into this to see whether we should and could play a role in this area as well. Having said that, I've been asked to introduce the Eyeglass Narratives, so I'll go through the highlights. Next slide, please. Firstly, eyeglasses represents the biggest need for one AT. It's about 2.2 billion, actually probably a little bit more, that have one or more vision impairment or blindness that needs eyeglasses. What is important, or what stands out to me, is the need really is concentrated in LMIC countries, especially low-income countries, and it has significant economic consequences when vision impairments goes uncorrected. Next slide, please. There are a lot of barriers to access for eyeglasses: low awareness and low acceptance, stigma in general. There's in many countries a high cost for the end user to get the product. The service delivery models, the in-country service delivery models, are quite resource heavy, both on the requirements of infrastructure and on the requirements of trained staff. And very importantly, eyeglasses and AT in general experience a low level of investment and priority by governments. Next slide, please. This one shows the correlation between corrected and uncorrected presbyopia by region. And what I really wanted to highlight is the third column, which shows the difference from high income countries to other regions, or to regions in general. So obviously Sub-Saharan and South Asia really stands out as regions with a high concentrations of uncorrected presbyopia. Next slide, please. This sort of also shows regional differences and age differences in the most common reflective vision impairments, so myopia and presbyopia. The thing for me that sticks out and that I highlight is the differences in age groups, which is obviously of important to the UNICEF mandate, and myopia is the most common refractive error for children. So it's estimated that about 312 million children suffer from this worldwide. Next slide, please. Negative effects from lack of access to eye care. So I'm going to go through the main items in the report. So one is a high productivity loss, which we already saw in the first slide. It has an impact on global economy on around 270 billion US dollars. Next slide, please. There's also other factors such as, for instance, roadside accidents. So there are some examples from India and the UK, also both on what it means for life security, but also societal costs. Next slide, please. Very importantly, uncorrected vision impairments have a high impact on the quality of life. Studies show that persons with vision impairments have a higher risk of depression, anxiety, and social isolation. And the social isolation can often lead to cognitive decline as well. Lower education is also something that we are very aware of at UNICEF, and something that we strongly combat through our country offices. And vision impairment is one very important route to lower education outcomes. Next slide, please. So there are 5 strategic goals mentioned. One is to mobilize key stakeholders, including donors, multilateral NGOs, strengthen global policy guidance and delivery standards, including access to new types of products and deliveries, service deliveries, support the governments in creating comprehensive eye care plans, engage the private sector, and build and drive awareness around consumer demand for eyeglasses. The report also highlights a few new technologies that could be interesting to look at for better service delivery or cheaper service delivery. One is smartphone-based visual acuity tests. You can read a lot more about it in the narrative, but it's an interesting way of using smartphones to easy access. One is handheld, easy-to-use refraction devices. The important thing about this is it's a device that requires minimal training for staff, so it's easier to access without the heavy resource requirement of trained staff. Photo screeners using cameras to estimate the refractive error. Next slide, please. And self-refraction devices integrated into the delivery of eyeglasses. So this is something introduced by Global Vision 2020. The next step of the narrative is one for implementation, to do an implementation strategy developed by UK-funded AT 2030, so GDI Hub. The narrative is also, as Alison already mentioned, being used by ATscale to help us inform our investment strategies, so both in the short and the long term, and finally drive large-scale investments and financial instruments to achieve long-term outcomes, also through ATscale. So just concluding quickly before I hand back to Louise, obviously the narratives will also have a huge impact on how UN generally looks on this. So both WHO and UNICEF will use the narratives to inform our decision-making within these 5 product groups. So we thank GDI Hub and CHAI for the great work that's been done on the narratives. Over to you, Louise.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dennis. I think that's a really interesting snapshot, I guess, just at the scale of the challenge. And what an impact it can make, and actually how we can use technology to really drive forward in a lot of these areas. And I think what also really came to mind is kind of from the kind of product narrative report was that the kind of number of people requiring kind of eyeglasses is increasing, and that actually the impact of stigma and awareness as well that feeds into that. So I think it's a really interesting area, and certainly something that that will be fascinating to see how that develops, and actually how technology plays such a crucial role in enabling greater access to that particular assistive technology on a wider scale. So we're next going to come to Ben. I'll leave Ben to introduce himself in a little bit more detail, and he's going to talk through some of the prosthetics findings.
Great, thanks Louise. So I'm Dr. Ben Oldtree, so I'm a research fellow. I sit between Global Disability Innovation Hub and the Institute of Making, ECL, working on AT 2030. So yeah, next slide please. Stop tour of the prosthetics product narrative. If we go to, yeah, next slide, thanks. So globally, there's an estimated 65 million people that live with amputations. When done adequately, you know, this, prosthesis provision can improve their quality of life, but only 5 to 15% of people in LMICs that could have one have access. And we project that this global need is going to double by 2050. You can see here that there's a wide range of prosthetic devices available. Could we go back? Sorry. Thanks. Sorry. Yeah. So I'm just going to state that this product narrative, we're focusing on lower limb prosthesis because we could see that the majority of amputations globally in various regions are of lower limb. But we hope that a lot of the conclusions that we're drawing here can be applied to upper limb prosthetics. Thanks very much. Can we carry on? Great. So we can see that we know there's a wide range of devices available, ranging from very basic types up to more higher end intelligent devices. But what's true to all of them is that they require trained and accredited prosthetists and the wider skill sets around them, such as OTs and physical therapists, to provide a good service delivery. Unfortunately, there's a severe lack of these in LMICs. There is some donor funding, but it is limited, and historically it's been prioritised for the training of prosthetists, trying to address this capacity issue. Next slide, please. So the global market is dominated by a few key companies, and they do focus on high income settings and the higher end of products. Unfortunately, the LMIC market is small, and one of the reasons for this is this lack of capacity that's found there. One of the reasons for this is that there's a current lack of governmental input, which leads to non-profits, so NGOs, charities, faith-based organisations, which have very strong presence in some countries, and these dominate the provision of services. One way we can be improving the situation is if we could be developing collaborations between the public sector and for-profit business, and looking to expand access to devices globally. A barrier to this is that just the lack of data. If we could be improving the amount of data on amputees and aspects around amputation, this could help to improve advocacy, and it could drive investment. Investors aren't going to invest in things if there isn't evidence for there being a market in the first place. And this would improve the quality of care that could be given out. Next slide, please. So another problem we see is that there's poor referral pathways from amputation service to rehabilitation services. And this leads to patient drop-off. A lot of this is around just low awareness of what services are available across teams. Fortunately, when referred, these services can be quite costly to the users and often very far away. They're concentrated in urban settings. And if people are from a rural setting, then that journey could be both long and very difficult. One thing that could help here is decentralization. Decentralization efforts are currently focused on pre and post fitting rather than the actual fitting process itself. And we'd like to see investigation into the cost effectiveness to justify increasing these endeavours. One thing that could help with decentralization is a variety of innovative socket fabrication, such as direct casting and digital fabrication, like 3D printing or carving. These could expand service, but currently adoption is still limited for a number of reasons that we hope can be addressed. Next slide, please. So another thing that we see in the market is just that affordability. I mean, it's expected that affordability is a barrier. There are lower cost components that are available globally, particularly ones that are coming from Asian markets, but the transparency on the quality of these devices is low. And if that's not clear, then there's not trust in that as an option. And so penetrating into LMIC markets is going to be hard. Another thing that ramps up prices is just the difficulties in the current supply chain network. If we had more responsive supply channels that possibly via regional distributors, it could help affordability greatly. I mean, currently most clinicians and workshops in LMICs, they're having to place individual orders with overseas suppliers, and there's no economies of scale being put into place, even on a regional or country level, and this would help a lot. A key point that are just very important from my mind is just that irrespective of the delivery approach or the supply approach used, that this human resource capacity is always going to be a limitation. So if we can explore novel ways of expanding and extending this capacity, it could result in a greater impact. Next slide, please. So as we look at these challenges as a whole, we can lump them into three sets. So we've got demand, or the perceived lack of demand, which is truly the problem. Supply and enablers that are currently not in place that could enable improvements in the marketplace. I'll fly through these a little bit. So on this perceived lack of demand, key problem here is just the lack of awareness from different stakeholders, users on what services are available, decision makers on what the numbers of amputees that they could be helping, and many other points where just lack of knowledge is problematic. A major thing that results in is just low political will to enact and improve the situation. Also meaning that there's lack of funding, and that means that the out-of-pocket expenditure to the users at the end is often high. And we've mentioned about local prosthetists and decentralization. On the supply side, there are lots of devices available globally, but there is a lack of product options that are specifically applicable to LMIC settings. There are modular options around, but they're generally too expensive for the lower markets, unless we're dealing with more of a middle income user in whatever setting we're referring to. And lack of local supply chains. So on these enablers that could be helping the market here, a key one here is just there's no defined outcome measures to be playing this back, to be showing the benefits that we could be developing. If there's outcome measures to quantify the economic benefits from prosthetics, it would help. And that's not just from the users themselves, but it's also for the wider community, the people that are supporting these people with disabilities when they don't have a device. That could be building the economy in this way. Also assessing performance of new technologies that come through in a clear way. Okay, so we move on to the strategic objectives. So this first one, I'll linger on this first one just a little bit rather than the other ones, because I really think that this one on data underpins the other four. and it's what improves the likelihood of the other 4 from working. It's developing foundational data sets to inform the investment case for services and developing the development of standards. So some key points here, and please do read further in the document on this. It's just that, again, it's just the lack of data on just understanding how amputees are unable to access services and what that demand could be. And without such data, just policymakers are not going to prioritise investments, and neither are private investors. More on the product development side, if consensus can be built on what these outcome measures could be to underpin and standardise the data collection that we're suggesting, it would help. And also just to guide research and development of devices. So the next one, number 2, around the governmental level, wanting to support countries to define appropriate policies to invest in the system. Next slide, please. Thanks. So number 3, on innovation. Increase in market validation of new technologies, particularly ones that could simplify, decentralize, and lower the cost of provision. Number 4, around affordability, increasing the uptake of lower cost components by making it transparent of what the quality level of these are, to empower both the buyers but also clinicians in place so that they can make more informed decisions. And number 5, around supply chains. If we want to strengthen that regional mechanisms to improve economies of scale and access to the wide range of components that are needed to suit various users in various settings. Great. So that's it. So thank you very much. Thank you very much to Cynthia Liao, who led this work for CHAI, and the wider team that was involved. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ben. That was really fascinating, and I think particularly from my perspective, I thought it was really interesting just to hear the scale, I guess, of the system and all the different elements that feed into that, from, I guess, your kind of basic level around kind of a lack of data and the challenges that come from that, through to the policy and the political will, and then right through to the product development, supply, and the markets that are involved in distributing this assistive technology to those that need it most. So I think that really kind of summarizes, just in that product narrative even alone, I guess all the different elements that feed into these challenges, and why it's so important to have this kind of overriding documents that really summarize some of the landscape that assistive technology sits within, and identifies where those changes can happen to make the biggest impact. So we're going to go along to questions now. I can see you've had quite a few come in on the Q&A box, so thank you very much for those. But I'm just going to quickly pass over to Kathy Holloway, just to have any final reflections, I guess, across the kind of product narratives as a whole, and I guess trends that kind of and themes that are appearing throughout some of this research that we're doing, not just on eyeglasses and prosthetics, but also some of the other product narratives that we've already produced on wheelchairs and hearing aids, and those coming forward in digital as well.
I think some of the things were out by Fred and Ben and Dennis, but for me, I suppose data really does underpin everything. It doesn't matter who you're talking to, if it's a government or if it's UNICEF, or there's a question in the chat about, can somebody help get prosthetics to people in Nigeria? Is there funding for that? I think it was Nigeria. We don't know where the need is, and we don't kind of understand the need. So there's the idea of the need being a problem. We all know there's a need, but there's no demand there. And that's the first major thing across any of assistive technologies. There's no demand, there's no functioning market. And that's what Frey was talking about when he said about how we need to start, I think it was Alison actually said, she used the term market shaping, and I think market shaping and market making is what she said. I use slightly different language, which is kind of like tilting the playing field. Like there's this playing field, and at the moment we need to tilt it to make it a bit fairer. And I think governments have a huge role to play in that, as well as donors, because we need donors to continue to fund this space, but we also need to begin to genuinely grow a functioning market. So if we want entrepreneurs to be able to come into this space, there needs to be mechanisms like tax incentives and others to get people into this space and to grow and to grow it, so that we're all not needing to do this anymore. I think the other thing is digital disruption. So we are doing the digital product narrative at the moment, but I think, you know, Ben spoke a bit about it within prosthetics, but I think the same could be true in wheelchairs. Digital obviously is great for screening tools across eyesight screening and hearing screening. So I think really the kind of digital be more excited to open up to the Q&A and hear from some of the many panelists and participants.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Kathy. I don't know if everyone else is also having a few technical issues with a little bit of sound quality and some of the video quality, but hopefully you're all still hearing us loud and clear where possible. So we thought we'd just start with a couple of questions. So we just thought we'd start with one, and I think we just wanted to highlight, I guess in summary of some of these narratives, kind of what are the biggest drivers and challenges to implementation, and I guess what is that next step and what does the future look like? So it would be great to go to Alison, just to hear, I guess, your reflections from the strategic perspective of what are those priorities?
Sure, thanks so much. So if I think about the country level and go back a bit to some of the themes that I highlighted and have been highlighted by others, you know, I think we need to make sure that we're looking at this in terms of how we're implementing some of the different solutions within the broader context and situation in those countries. And so making sure that we're bringing together all the relevant groups and having a coordinated approach, not just those partners who are supporting an implementation, but making sure that AT users and disabled persons organizations on the ground, as well as the government, are all coming together in terms of the planning for these interventions and the actual implementation of them, to ensure that there is the right ownership and buy-in and coordination, as I mentioned, and making sure that within each of the pieces that we're doing, that we're also providing the right information so that there can be these strategic plans and there can be an increase in resources, providing, I think we heard already about increasing data to have a greater investment case. We need to provide the information about how these different interventions can be really important for the individual, for their families, but also that they have benefits that are far-reaching, you know, economic, health, and social benefits for these countries, so that we can ensure that everyone really also has an understanding of why they're doing it and the importance of it, so that they can then prioritize it as well.
Thank you, Alison. Yeah, I think that's really interesting, just to see that importance on a country level, as well as that more kind of international stance as well. Frey, we'll maybe come to you and ask the same question around kind of what are the priorities and what do you see the major challenges, but also the next steps being?
Perfect, and thank you, Louise. Perhaps I can link it to another question that I see in the chat box, which is developing countries are very slow in assistive technology, and how can we boost this? And I think at this point, I want to make a reference and acknowledge the great work that was done in recent years by WHO's GATE team to lead the development of a series of different tools that can provide a starting point for countries to increase access to assistive technology. And some of these tools have been developed in partnership with other groups here represented on this panel, like UNICEF, and a variety of tools are also being developed under the AT 2030 program. And I think what we're learning increasingly is that one of the reasons why there's a perception of slow action, it often has to do with a lack of clarity and visibility about the current situation, as well as the different roles and responsibilities. And by, again, the same point, convening the different stakeholders using a structured approach to provide the information, provide the facts, provide a framework to them, which steps and actions can be taken as a starting point for increasing assistive technology. We're increasingly learning that this has promise in being an effective way to make progress. And I think what we need to do now is document those learnings, make those available for others to replicate, but also expand and help other countries, help other governments do more, and help put them in the lead for building the foundations and lead the programming. I think it's the only way that, much beyond our collective efforts at the country level, things can also progress much faster. So I hope that helps answer that question.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Frey. And another couple of questions I've seen come through on the chat, I think link quite closely to the challenges of this kind of supply chains and how new products can come in and be established in low and middle income countries. So we had one question particularly around, I guess, what is the next steps for that, and how can it work, and does it work in terms of creating or using non-certified products, or what are the next steps into increasing the number of certified products that are focused on and suitable for low and middle income countries. So Dennis, we'll maybe come to you, because I think it'd be really interesting to hear just your perspective on, I guess, those two areas in terms of what is the priorities in establishing supply chains, and how can we increase the opportunities for new products to come into those markets.
Yeah, thanks. So I think it's important to recognize that there's I think we all have recognized there's a huge gap between the actual need and the demand that we experience, right? There's a massive global need, but there's not a huge demand in low middle income countries. And I want to echo what came from Alison and Frey, that a lot has to do with political prioritization and internal in-country mapping of what is already being done. So one thing is saying that there's no political prioritization, but often it's more is happening in the country than what we give them credit for. But it's just a very fragmented approach where there's little coordination of the efforts that is actually being done. So internal mapping would allow us to help the countries build the enabling environments that is required for them to actually start procuring and distributing products. So the by enabling environment, I mean an ecosystem for products that involves everything from screening persons with disabilities to get the right products and the right services, everything from screening to procurement to logistics to training of staff to servicing of products, etc. All of that is unfortunately not very present in many low-income countries. So even if we were to donate a lot of products to a given country, they wouldn't be able to sustain it or maintain it. So there's a prerequisite for us to help build the enabling environment in low-income countries, even before we start building the market, or at least concurrent with us building the market through, for instance, market shaping. So yeah, internal in-country mapping and ecosystem building is really the next big requirements, and it does require political will and involvement.
Fantastic. I appreciate that was a huge question, Dennis. So I think that was a really interesting summary, just to kind of refine what those real next steps are and the priorities. We've also had a couple of questions come in, particularly for you, Ben, around the barriers in stats and data, and a few people asking kind of how can we go about increasing those and overcoming the barriers, so increasing the volume of stats and data we're able to collect, considering kind of confidentiality and ethics, and how do they interplay?
Yeah, that's a great. Am I there? Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question, because I mean the problem with developing assistive technology as opposed to other product development is just that when you're doing trials, you're putting a lot on someone's life for a certain period of time. And yes, that's great if the product's going well, but if it's early stage research, then that's a lot to ask. And in certain settings, trying to do no harm while you're doing these studies needs to be taken into account. I think for me, when we're looking actually, rather than the nature of the statistics themselves, I think this is why we need a certain, we want to be developing a consensus on what these data standards should look like. is that this, whatever volume of data that you gather, it's not going to be useful unless there's good comparisons to be able to be made between those data sets. And it's a very hard task. I mean, I think particularly in prosthetics, I think it's a very hard task. The fitting process itself, it's very specific to the individual prosthetist skill level, and trying to make comparisons between different workshops is very hard. But yes, it is a hard question, but it's a question that should be answered. So yeah, I think for me, really, the first stage of that is developing consensus on what the correct questions are to be asked, and then defining, what the framework of those answers could look like. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Ben. We've also had a couple of questions come through, or kind of along the theme of stigma, and I guess what impact stigma has in terms of people sourcing assistive technologies, but also the awareness, which seems to be a theme that's come through a little bit during today's session as well. So we'll maybe come to you, Kathy, to just give a little bit of a sense of, I guess, what importance we can be played to stigma within this environment, and how work around market shaping can impact those kind of, I just guess, cultural intricacies that are also at play.
Yes, that's not a difficult one at all, Louise, is it? It's very stigma and negative attitudes, in particular towards people who use assistive technologies, are extremely challenging, and some of those are very interwoven into cultures, which make it very difficult to change. Those cultures are often mostly changed from community leaders helping to influence local groups and people, and also just getting very clear messaging on the fact that, the fact that you might not have a leg, or you use a prosthetic leg, or I use eyeglasses, that doesn't really matter. It's just a part of who you are. But it is challenging, and it's challenging in every context. We are doing work with Well Told Story, Shazaz now in Kenya, and they're a magazine that reach over half of Kenyan youth, and we are just trying to, in the first instance, just normalize assistive technology use. So in the magazine, young people, stories. The story is not about disability, the story is not about assistive technology, it just so happens that some of the characters are disabled. And I think that working with Shazaz was inspired a bit by what happened with GDI Hub came out of the Paralympic legacy, and that really did changed attitudes in the UK at least. So it changed some attitudes globally, but in the UK, there was a complete difference while the Paralympics was on. It was amazing. Everybody was happier to start with, but people began to really value disability and disabled people. And I know for a fact that when Channel 4 and when the Paralympics, when they got the London Paralympics, and when they were asked how many people would come and watch the Paralympics, less than 1% of the UK population said they would watch the Paralympics. And when asked why, they said, well, why would we want to watch people like that? And like that. That's exactly what they said. And they didn't realise that people who use a wheelchair to get around, or people who use prosthetic legs are just as brilliant, or just as annoying, or just as fantastic, or as anybody else. So they went on a huge marketing campaign. And that's the other element of this. We have to all start marketing at governments, but in our local communities. We have to be like advocates of assistive technology users 100% of the time. We have to get people who influence people to talk about assistive technology, just to mainstream the idea. It's just a thing, it's just a technology, and if people had it, their lives would be better, society would be fairer, it would be, that would make more sense for us all. And also economies would grow for those that care about the economics. So I could waffle on this for quite a while, but I think I would follow there's a Sport Against Stigma program within the 80-20-30 program that's been postponed because the Tokyo Olympics was postponed, but it will roll out next year, and that will get knowledge of assistive technology through the schools program, working with the Agitos Foundation as part of the International Paralympic Committee and GDI Hub and Loughborough University. So yeah, watch this space, keep checking in with 80/20/30, and let us know what you think. We certainly don't have all the answers, and as Frey said earlier, you know, the World Health Organization has led the way in this, and we thank Chapal and team for helping guide us all. So maybe Chapal could have the answer. He would definitely have a good answer for this.
Wonderful, thank you, Kathy. So that brings us near the end of the session today, and I think there's obviously been a lot of questions come through. So thank you so much for everybody from right around the world that's joined the session today and put forward all your questions. I'm aware we haven't been able to cover all of them, so we will be producing some content after the session so we can help cover some of those, but also just provide a bit of an overview. So do keep an eye out on the GDI Hub website for that. And I guess I also just wanted to say that these reports were put together in the context of the GDI Hub AT2030 work, which is a UK aid funded programme to get assistive technology to those that need it most. And I think the product narratives and the discussion we've had today really showcase the importance of that work and why the right assistive technology really is our aim, and to get it to those people in lower middle income countries that currently really don't have access. But actually, as technology moves forward, the opportunities are only growing. And as a community, we have so much potential to make impact in this area. So before I wrap up, I just want to say a huge thank you to all the panelists that were able to join us today, and our brilliant partners from ATscale, CHAI and UNICEF that have worked really hard with us to put together and develop these documents, and also very much kind of looking forward to the future as we work together globally. And we really look forward to kind of keeping in touch with you all. I think there's potentially an opportunity for us to do a session maybe a few months down the line, 6 months down the line, to look at some of these areas in a bit more detail as well. So do watch this space. Our next Disability Innovation Live will take place in October, middle of October, and that's going to be on inclusive design. So we'll send you some more information on that as well. So that's it for today. Thank you for the panelists. Thank you to all of you who joined from around the world, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Bye.
Very much.